think we're approaching the top of the hour here. I hope everyone is having a fantastic Wednesday so far. Very excited for everyone tuning in. We have another fantastic edition of Virtual Business Bites for August today. For those of you who may not know, my name is Colin Sommerhauser. I'm the head of Hana House here in Palo Alto. And just as a quick background, Business Bites is a collaborative virtual series hosted by On Its Axis and Hana House. If you're not familiar, On Its Axis is an innovation consulting firm based in Southern California, and Hana House is a flexible co-working space and cafe with locations in both Palo Alto and Newport Beach. Now, our co-working locations have been closed for the past 16 months due to the pandemic, but the good news is we just officially reopened about 2 weeks ago, and we are welcoming guests back into both of our locations now, which is super exciting. And what's cool about Hana House is our workspace is open to anyone that wants to use it. We have absolutely no membership costs or long-term commitment. Instead, we offer this pay-by-the-hour workspace reservation model, so it's super flexible, super versatile, and it really can be used on an as-needed basis, which is very unique in the co-working world. We also have our partner, Blue Bottle Coffee. I have one here with me right here. Inside our building, serving delicious craft coffee and small eats. So if you are local to Newport Beach or the Bay Area and want to come check out our space, you can feel free to head to our website. It's hanahouse.com. You can see all of our pricing and seating options, and you can make a reservation and prepay online right then and there. Please do come visit us. I promise if you come, we'll treat you to some coffee, give you a little tour of the space. It'd be super fun to see some people come out that tune into this virtual series. It's been such a long journey for us over the past year and a half, and we're so thrilled that we are finally welcoming people back into our space. And by the way, we have increased our cleaning, sanitation, and safety protocols and standards so everyone can work with peace in mind in our space. Now today, I do encourage you all to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to engage and ask questions throughout the session. And as a quick starter, how about we have everyone go into the chat box right now and comment where you're tuning in from. We always love to see where our audience members are coming from. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, as well as sent out via email within the next week or so. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our amazing moderator, Kelly from On Its Axis, to welcome our panelists today.
Well, thank you so much, Colin, and thank you to all of you tuning in or listening in on the recorded broadcast. I'm really excited to be talking with our panelists today on the topic of Pricing 101. It's a behind-the-scenes discussion about product pricing, and if you're like me, perhaps there's been a time when you've been at a store or you've been going through the process of thinking about the purchase of a major purchase, and you've wondered to yourself, how did they decide the cost of this? How did they decide the membership cost? Or maybe you were listening to Colin talk about the Hana House model today and their choice to invert the typical workspace membership pricing model. Today, we're going to be talking with three incredible speakers who will be sharing insights around the how and why products are priced the way they are. So with no further ado, I'll give our true experts today an opportunity to say hello and share their expertise. So starting with you, Babis, if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself and about your role.
I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you, Kelly. Yes, so I'm Babis. I currently lead the product management and pricing for Blueground, who is a venture-backed startup in the PropTech space. And what we do is we have fully furnished apartments across the world. Before that, my experience was again in product and pricing. I spent about 6 years at Amazon running product management, and most of my roles had a pricing flavor, so it's kind of an interesting intersection. So about 10 plus years in this product pricing space. Really excited to be here and discuss with everyone.
Thank you so much. And JJ, will you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your experience and role?
You bet. Hi, everyone. My name is JJ Rorie. I am a vice president at a company called Sequent Learning Networks. We're a product management training and advisory firm. We worked with companies across industries all over the world. So I've worked with folks like Kaiser Permanente and Otis Elevators and Verizon, FedEx, RBC, lots of others, lots of fun work doing talent management and product management optimization all over the world. I have a background in product management, as you can imagine, was a product manager and product leader for companies like First Data Fiserv, T-Mobile, American Hospital Association. I split my time between the Dallas, Texas area and New York City. And then hopefully wherever my clients send me around the world, hopefully we'll get to do that again, real world travel. And I'm also the host of a podcast called Masters of Product Management, and thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much. And Shelley, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background and role.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shelley Iocona. I'm the founder and the principal at Onyx Axis. We're an innovation consulting firm. We help organizations grow and scale through our product and people framework. Our team helps design change agile organizations and empowers them to spark change in their product portfolios. Previously to Onyx Axis, I spent many years in engineering management, program management, and product management at companies like DirecTV and Yahoo. I also led product management for early stage and high growth startups, helping them get to product market fit and commercialize products in the marketplace. I have a deep passion for health tech products, prop tech products. Onyx Axis helps companies with really any sort of tech-enabled product. It's really our focus. And today, really any company has tech or is thinking about tech innovation in some capacity. I reside in Southern California and have been spending some of my time on the East Coast. I'm from Philadelphia. Kelly runs the firm with me, which is really exciting. And I'm super happy to be here today. And I know I'm going to learn a lot from this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you to our expert panelists who volunteered their time to join us today and share their expertise with the community. I'm going to begin with the question I have, which is, how do you explain pricing strategy to someone with no product or market pricing experience? And Babis, I'm going to start with you.
Definitely, yeah, thank you. And by the way, I find it really interesting that we all have a pricing angle, but also like a product management background, which is kind of an interesting, intersection. Like many pricing professionals traditionally just focus on pricing, so it's kind of an interesting panel here. Sure. So if you think of strategy as like, the activities a company has to do to achieve their goals, then pricing strategy is basically the pricing activities the company does to achieve their goals. And so this is basically, a very brief definition. Just to make it specific, I usually distinguish between the how do we think about pricing question and what the actual price should be. And pricing strategy mostly answers the first one, although clearly influences the second part. I think of pricing strategy as a set of principles that closely aligned with other parts of the company, like marketing, positioning, like engineering, even like the cost structure, and defines how should we be thinking about pricing for our products.
Wonderful. And JJ, would you add anything or change anything to what was just shared?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Bob has hit it on the head there. When I think about explaining pricing strategy, at its simplest definition, it's just the process or the plan that an organization uses to determine what the correct or optimal price is for a product, right? There are things, as Bob has said, that you go into that. It's not a simple process, but the definition is just that. It's what a company goes through to determine what the right price is. I always look at a few different things. Value to the customer, right? That's clearly part of pricing and getting it right. And then from an internal organizational standpoint, it's, how do we want to win in the market? Right. And then what is our business model? So those kind of big elements, value to the customer, how do we want to win competitively? and what's our business model? What are we trying to get out of it? Those are the things that drive that plan or that process.
Thank you so much, JJ. Shelley, I couldn't help but seeing you nod along as JJ was talking about adding value and the business model elements of pricing strategy. I'm going to turn the same question over to you and give you an opportunity to add your perspective on this.
Yeah, I really like what both of you shared, and I agree. I think if I take kind of how I think of pricing strategy, years ago, I actually took a class at Pragmatic Marketing, which I'll share in the chat, on pricing because I didn't have a ton of experience pricing products. I really, as I shared, focused more on working with engineering. And so when I had to learn more business, more market, more customer, I really didn't know where to start. And so I think they shared a 1% improvement in price can lead to a 10% increase in profit, which is like based on some Harvard Business Review study, which I'll also share in the chat. But I'm thinking that was so fascinating to me many years ago. But really where we focus and where I focus on pricing today is really thinking about the customer side. So it's not just about what we're charging, but what are the customer needs and wants? How do customers buy? What do they value? Where do they buy? And so when I think about how to start pricing, I think we do it at different stages. Business model is one place, as JJ shared, but it's really about how are we going to position this product in the market to understand what's comfortable and what the perceived and relative value is. And then I think about pricing strategy being tied to customer satisfaction. And we know customer satisfaction is about retention. So I think products and product pricing is so fascinating because we really need to look at customers and their psychology. I think if somebody could have told me that years ago, I would have thought more about that versus, doing the math. It would really be more about getting in the minds of our customer.
Thank you, Shelley. And thank you all. I think that really sets up our conversation today very nicely in terms of the role that pricing plays in the overall product success map. I think what an amazing statistic that 1% for 10% return statistic really stands out, particularly when we think about the other elements we focus on for product success. And so JJ, I'm going to come to you and really bring that question full circle. Why is pricing an important aspect of product success? And can you share a real world example of how this shows up for us?
Yeah, when you think about it, with any product, it's kind of a two-way street or a two-sided return on investment equation. Right. So for the parties involved, and of course, sometimes there are more than two parties involved, but for simplicity, let's just talk buyer and seller in that scenario. So the customer is giving you some money and they expect a value matching that or exceeding that amount. And the company who's selling the product has spent some money to create or build the product. And so they're expecting some return on that, right? And so there's this like dynamic two-sided return on investment. What's the value? What are we trying to get out of it? How are we trying to prove the value to the customer? That's happening dynamically when you're trying to sell or trying to buy a product. And so product companies need to understand that that's happening and understand what they can do about it. So the example that I think of is, it's not a specific product per se, but it's enterprise software products. And some research has been done over the years about enterprise software products, and that over 50% of the features within any given enterprise software product, so again, operations, financial, human resources, et cetera, those types of business applications, over 50% of the features within a software product are never used. So there's a huge disconnect there because the customer is thinking 50% of your product is meaningless to me, but the company who's building the software, they're surely valuing all of those features, right? And so they've got to figure out how to be creative with the pricing and the value. Some ways the enterprise software companies have done it. SaaS has helped a little bit, right? Software as a service and subscription-based pricing strategies, but they've also modularized their products, right? And try, so you can buy this module, not that module, and try to find that sweet spot for each customer target or customer base where they can get more keenly to the value and then price it. So again, there's this constant like back and forth of what are we trying to get out of it by selling our product, and most importantly, what's the customer perceiving they're getting out of it. And that balance has to stay in touch with everything that we're doing from a product perspective.
Thank you so much. Shelley, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Why is pricing an important aspect of product success? And can you share a real world example for us?
Yeah, I think that pricing a product can have just such a major impact on a product's entry into the market. It can really turn off potential customers if it isn't priced right, or if the pricing isn't understood. And so, you know, beyond losing revenue, you might just have a complete product failure. And so one company that I think does a really great, incredible job with understanding customer psychology as it relates to pricing is Apple. I mean, I think I was blown away when Steve Jobs introduced the first iPad, and you know, everyone was really curious where the product would sit in their portfolio. And so he put it sort of squarely on the screen in between the phone and the laptop as this new thing, this shiny object that now everybody wants because it's this slab of glass and it's so cool. And so he really built it up. And then he put up on the screen what he thought analysts would say the price is. And I think it was $9.99, some thought around 9 being, you know, value. And he puts it up on the screen, and then he does the big reveal and it's slashed to $4.99, right? And so people think, oh my gosh, I got a deal, like it's $500 off. And, you know, as we learn about pricing strategies, we know this is something called anchor pricing. So anchor pricing helps customers visualize the ability to purchase or afford it. And then you typically offer a few other options, right? So I think there was, you know, storage would add this much. At the time, adding 3G to the Wi-Fi product added this much. But I feel like it's brilliant for a new product to really leverage being a marketer in thinking about how the customers are going to perceive this price, and what type of customer are we attracting, what level. And so those that can only afford the most affordable option probably see themselves as being able to pay for that $4.99, and the ones that are enthusiasts can justify paying more. And I think, you know, being really transparent about what you're getting and at what price and what the options are was huge in their product success. And they just keep doing it over and over again.
Thank you, Shelley. Babis, I'd love to come to you and hear your perspective on this. Why is pricing an important aspect of product success? And do you have a real world example to share?
Sure, yeah. And by the way, I agree with everything that was said before. Actually, I was planning to also like discuss a little bit Shelley's point around like this 1 to 10% ratio. So I guess why is pricing important? I think it's the lever that has the biggest impact to profitability, basically. So if you increase pricing by 1%, like, you know, you improve your profit far more than if you, let's say, decrease your cost by 1%, if you increase your sales volume by 1%. So assuming, you know, these 3 or 4, you know, elements have the same effort, like the impact to profit is much, much larger if you manage to just increase prices by 1%. So clear impact to the bottom line, I guess. And then it also maps to the broader strategy. So my example is IKEA, which is, I feel like pricing is part of their overall strategy. So for example, like the whole idea is to be very affordable. And so their strategy is to, for example, to let the customer assembly the furniture, which is not, or didn't used to be that way. But by understanding that part of the value they offer is they can discount the product, and like the customer is happy to take on this additional task. It's a win-win situation because they can save on, you know, packaging and like transportation and all these things. And so I find it like brilliant to have a broader strategy, and pricing being one aspect of this strategy, and like having this consistency between all the elements of your strategy to basically deliver the most value for your customers.
Thank you so much. I think one really key aspect that I've heard from all of you is the role that customers play in this strategy, and the dynamic between the exchange of the organization, the business that's creating the product, and the people who will be consuming it. I'd love to hear what other factors contribute to product pricing strategy, and if there's any hierarchy for these factors. So, for example, Shelley, as I come to you, we're thinking about that Apple product where you talked about that price point at $499. Was there consideration that that was the largest customer segment that they wanted to acquire, and that's why they chose that market impact point? Would be one way to think about this question. So what factors contribute to product pricing strategy, and is there a hierarchy?
Yeah, these are great questions. I think I'm not sure what Apple was thinking with the iPad. That was a long time ago, but I do think that price point was, yes, how can we attract, because it's a new product. So I think it really depends on new entry versus evolution of an existing. So maybe on the new iPad, brand new, let's get as many customers as possible and grow adoption. But on something like the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is, I believe, the most premium iPhone that is out there today, you know, I think, you know, you're looking at a higher end customer, you're targeting a segment, maybe creatives, who will justify paying more for that larger phone, better camera, overall better performance. So you might not get the volume on that, but your profitability is so high. And so they've just refined this model over time. It's so impressive. Where do you start? I think you start by researching your competition. I think you really need to understand the personas of the customers that you intend to attract. And you know, once you're armed with that information, you can develop the product so it serves multiple customers at different price points. Sometimes we'll do beyond just the product itself. When we do sort of business modeling, there's this high level pricing. What is the business model? What's covering our costs? How do we get to profitability? But then we'll even look at what are the features and how do we put together a cost to build, maintain, and market and evolve specific features over time. And so I think you have to sort of iterate your pricing strategy across the product development lifecycle over and over again. And then you look for market signals for how to adjust that. You don't want to be too reliant on people using discount codes to purchase a product, or referrals, right? You want to look at the data that you have and say, we have a great cross section of how we attract and retain customers. It isn't just one possible sales strategy.
Thank you, Shelley. Babis, I would love to hear from you, and maybe if you could share a few additional factors, if any exist, around product pricing strategy, and any hierarchy as you see it in those factors.
Sure, yeah, I totally agree. You know, starting from the customer and working backwards. I mean, having spent time at Amazon, I couldn't have said anything different here. But I think that it's important to really understand, because a need doesn't doesn't happen, out of nowhere. So customers are probably using some other product or some alternative way of fulfilling that need today. So it's really important to dive deep and understand, okay, how are you really fulfilling the need, and what benefits are you looking for? What's the perceived value you are getting, and then work backwards from that vision and like actually develop a product that better solves that problem. In terms of other factors, for example, like right now I'm working in this with Blueground, and the pricing problem is more of a dynamic pricing problem. So supply and demand are key. So in addition to understanding the customer, getting for building the product, getting the supply and demand, which is similar to the problem that airlines or a hotel might have, is like perishable supply that they have to sell, and with some opportunity to also sell in the future. And so getting these signals of supply and demand are core. There's some consideration about cost. I wouldn't say that like cost is a driver necessarily, but like it's not in the short term. It should be in the long term, in the sense that you're out of business if you cannot sell at some minimum profitability. But obviously you can go up and down, and there might be specific strategies where you could intentionally sell below cost, or either because you have a lot of supply at that point, or for other reasons like taking over a market. So I would add these two factors.
Thank you so much. JJ, I'm going to come to you, and I want to touch on something that you shared earlier in one of your comments when you talked about the features, and 50% of the features being something. You talked about modularization and sort of the introduction of kind of productization. And if we could talk about factors a bit as it relates to pricing, as it relates to this concept of delivering different kind of levels of product, or bringing different approaches to consumption to the table, that would be great.
Yeah, so it's it's interesting because depending on the type of product, and again, to use that example of a software product with features, there are some very dynamic, data-driven, technology-driven ways to analyze what value is assigned to which feature, supply and demand, all of these different elements that come into it. I mean, if you think of, Babis mentioned airlines and those types of things, and hotels and travel, and those are very supply and demand, and that's very dynamic. Healthcare insurance, right? It's very actuarial driven. Logistics companies and how much it costs to literally the gas and the planes. And I mean, all of these different things are dynamic, in real time, changing. And so a lot of companies have to have these very sophisticated pricing engines, and it's really a costing engine behind. But at the end of the day, it still always comes back to the customers, right? So those three elements that I see are, again, value to price equation, how are we going to win in the market? And that depends on the company. Winning in the market, Shelley mentioned, are we going to go in and try to get as many, customers as we can right away? That's one strategy. Is that what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to maximize profit because we know we're fairly new to the market? And that's a different pricing strategy. How are we winning, and what does winning mean, right? That couples with what does it matter and how does it value the customer at the end. I mean, there are ways to literally put scores on features and validate, this is more valuable based on our customer feedback than other features. I mean, there are lots of different ways that companies go about it. Sometimes very data driven, very scientific driven. But there's always a subjectivity to pricing. It's an art and a science. It really is the marriage of that. And so, it's not an easy thing to do. We are having this panel for a reason, because it's not easy to master. And so, companies have to use what they have in technology and couple that with qualitative, anecdotal data, and then come up with, whatever they predict will be the most successful in the market.
Thank you so much, JJ. And I just want to acknowledge, for those of you who are writing questions in chat, we really appreciate it. And we do have a questions and answers section towards the end, and I will be sure to ask the panelists the questions that are coming through. So thank you for sending those over. That said, we're going to come back to our kind of planned questions. And we're going to talk for just a moment about what happens when pricing goes wrong. Babis, as I'm going to come to you with this one, obviously we have this visual image of the business shutting down, but what are the risks of getting pricing wrong? And is there another type of real world example you'd like to share with us?
Sure, yeah, I mean, to an extreme, business shutting down could actually be an outcome. Hopefully, companies, would realize that there was a mistake and fix or fine tune their pricing. But I think generally, it's like leaving money on the table and potentially having many dissatisfied customers. One example I'm thinking, it's probably the 10-year anniversary, is like the Netflix basically splitting their DVD and streaming businesses, and so. Before you had this, I guess, subscription where you were paying about, I think, $10 a month for unlimited streaming plus some DVDs. As they were going through this idea of splitting the business to, the legacy DVD delivery and then the new thing back then, which was streaming, they thought of splitting pricing as well. And so you would pay, if I'm not mistaken, it was like $10 for each of these two, and the bundle would cost $16. So effectively, it was a 60% price increase, which customers didn't like. And I think partially, Netflix was not really thinking that they could demand such a higher premium, but was more like, hey, we really want to get rid of this legacy business. That being said, customers didn't perceive it that way. They were very unhappy. I think they lost about 800,000 customers in a quarter, if I remember correctly, and it was huge impact to the company, the stock, and everything. I mean, they figured it out. Netflix is doing fine, but it was a big lesson for all of us. So I think that's an interesting one in terms of how things can go wrong while they had, I assume, really good intentions.
Wonderful, thank you. Shelley, I'm going to come up to you next on this one. What are the risks of getting pricing wrong?
Yeah, that's a great example, Babis, and one that I think is in the MBA, case studies, right? It's what not to do. I guess I'll share something that's kind of more generic. So I don't want to call out a specific company, but I personally had this experience recently, and this is more using a freemium model, right? So you've got the product is free, and I pay for premium features only. And so in using the product, very feature rich, very robust. Moved it into my workflow, using it for months. And then all of a sudden, one of the features is disabled. There was no warning. There was nothing clear about it going away or the fact that it had some limitation. And so the impact there was my trust in the company. And really, I would have been happy to upgrade because it was only $5 a month. But getting that wrong, I think it really impacted my perception of the company and kind of my use of the products. I don't really use it as much because, especially in this particular instance, there's a lot of products on the market doing the same thing. And the differentiator was the product that's now disabled. So I may come back to it, but I think, the risk of getting that wrong, and we can say it wasn't even the price necessarily, it was maybe the lack of messaging or transparency. There's so many things they can do within the product to let the user know this is limited, you're going to run out. That impacts my trust, that impacts the customer's trust. And so, that's just kind of one example of where I think everything's going really well. The product's great and it's priced really well. But to truly get pricing right, you also have to get setting customer expectations right and being really clear.
Thank you, Shelley. And JJ, What are the risks of getting pricing wrong?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you an example of the real dramatic one of the company going bankrupt. But when I think of risks of pricing wrong, I mean, really there's two big risks, right? And you guys have talked about both of these for the most part. It's the mismatch of the value to price equation, right? So sometimes that's leaving money on the table. We actually price it too low. They would have paid more. More often it's we overinflated our idea of the value and we priced it too high. And then, that the customer is just not going to buy it at that price. It's not worth it to them. And we, don't sell the product and it's not successful. So there's that risk, right, of getting pricing wrong. The other risk is getting those other elements wrong, which is, mismatching your definition as an organization of what winning is in the market and your business model, right? And my example is Moviepass. For those of you who've heard of Moviepass, moment of silence for Moviepass. It was a company that it was actually around, I think, probably about 10 years. They went through multiple iterations, but they were generally a subscription service for movies in theaters, like in-person movies in movie theaters in the United States. And again, several pricing strategies, several iterations. And then in about 2017, they introduced a pricing model, which was $9.95 per month. And it was basically unlimited movies. It was what you could go to a movie every day. So it's for 30 movies per month. You could pay $10. Well, that's amazing in terms of the value to price equation. It was a no-brainer. If you go to more than one movie a month, it pays for itself. But the flip side of that, if they go to more than one movie a month, they lose money. Moviepass loses money. They didn't have really strong, good partnerships. They didn't own the theaters. So it was all about, third-party AMCs and Lowe's and all the others, which weren't terribly on board with this. So they had this, how are we going to win in the market idea of not so much the transaction, but the network. They were trying to build this database of moviegoers and community of people and moviegoers, and they were going to monetize that asset in the future. Well, that business model didn't match with how they were going to win, and ultimately they ran out of money. They were losing too much money. And so what happened was, unfortunately, I think early last year, it literally shut down through bankruptcy. So again, you can nail part of the, elements of product strategy and really build something that customers love. But if you don't do the other stuff right, you can lose in the end. What they tried to do is they tried to say, oh gosh, we're losing money. Now it's going to be $20 a month and you have to wait, 30 days before you go see a new feature. Well, that's completely changing the dynamic, right? To Shelley's point, an example, that changed the product that I signed up for. And so, you've got to really get all of those elements right or almost right. You can't get them that wrong like Moviepass did, or you can, end up having a quite dramatic situation. So that's what I see about getting it wrong. Doesn't always end up that way, that bad, but it still, leaves money on the table, leaves a bad taste in the customer mouth, or doesn't really reap the benefit that we expected from the product in the first place.
Thank you so much. I think this has been such a fascinating conversation as somebody who doesn't come from a product pricing background, thinking about all of the complexities that go into both the development of a product. So thinking about there's all of this work around sourcing the materials, creating a product that has value in the market, creating customer adoption, and then customer champions. I think we've been talking without saying the word about the customer buying journey and about sort of that business model approach to market. And that's the first question that we've heard from the audience. As we start to transition into these audience questions is, how do you determine the go-to-market strategy as it relates to the customer buying journey? So is there a key customer cohort you focus on, or is there a particular aspect? Do you just try to get adoption, not champions? what's the approach in thinking about this as you think about that customer and pricing? And I'll open it up to all of you if anybody wants to answer.
You know, this is JJ. I'll chime in here. I think it depends on if the product is new, and I may have missed part of the question and chime in if I did. I think it depends on if the product and the offering is new to the market, meaning there's an education needed for the entire market. There's no competition out there or limited competition. Do we need to prove that customers need this in the first place? And that does happen sometimes, right? Customers aren't always aware that they need something or that it would benefit them. And if that's the case, then you need to prove the value and find some influencers, find some champions to help drive that message across more of the market. If it's a kind of a well-known problem, and just a different way of solving the problem in the first place, then, I mean, usually you look at the journey of, whatever your prime first target market is, right? Whether that, again, whatever demographics, whatever geographies, whatever industries, whatever you believe is the prime target for you, and you start there as opposed to this is for everyone. You start small, even if it's a big market, you start pointedly and go from there, and you learn along the way, and for some, sometimes the price you put on a product is that first impression, and you need to be wary of that in terms of not making a bad first impression. But I mean, we live in a world today, for the most part, that is dynamic, and you can change pricing without a whole lot of issues. So, as that journey goes along and as you evolve and as you learn more, you can tweak things, hopefully as needed.
That's a wonderful response. Did anybody else want to add in on that before I go to the next audience question?
Yeah, I think I agree with JJ. I think you have to really look at what if it exists, what is my product most closely aligned to? And one that I think is fascinating, and I haven't dug in on this at all, but I'd love to do this, is this new product. What's newer to me, it's called a one wheel, and it's sort of a motorized skateboard, right? It's got one wheel and a deck, and it's so expensive. It's anywhere from $900, I think, to $1,800. And I'm just so curious about the pricing of that and their profitability. Like, what were they basing it against when you can take a bird scooter out by the hour? We know of Segway's demise. So I would really look at, is it new, as you shared? Is it new to the market? Is it existing? And then what's a comparison? What are we thinking we're going to take market share from another existing product on the market? And then who do we think will buy and evangelize this once it releases?
Thank you, Shelley. I can't help but feel the practice, JJ, you mentioned earlier around setting up the goal and understanding what success looks like as a company is a key aspect of determining that approach that you're talking about, especially based on your response, Shelley. I think that's really helpful. Is there anything you'd like to add to that conversation, Babis?
And I think it's interesting, because it really depends on the product. I would very much avoid the generic this product is for everyone. I think everyone in the previous comment very clearly alluded to the fact that you have to have a target customer, call it personas, call it however you want, but at least know who you are selling to, because not only your pricing but your overall packaging distribution strategy should be dependent on that. If you are doing B2B sales, you have to have the right price point. I mean, you cannot sell $10 software B2B sales, you'll go bankrupt tomorrow. Similarly, if it's something that if it's a self-service product and you sell it for I don't know, $500,000, which some enterprise products go for, this again won't work. So there is an alignment across the different parts of the company, obviously including pricing, to get to this optimal result.
Thank you so much. Well, this is clearly a topic that brings up a lot of questions. We have several in the chat. So moving right to the next one, have you used the Agile approach to develop or improve the process for product pricing? So I'll open that one up to the group. Has anybody here used an Agile approach to develop or improve pricing?
I've done that in taking something simple to market and, evolving the price based upon making the product better. We've also looked at, how do you can test products and people's comfort with pricing using campaigns and A/B tests. I mean, things like that, surveys. We do a lot of market research, but I'd love to hear from the others of some creative ways to do this in an Agile way.
We've used Agile like elements of the Agile methodology. For example, unavoid try something, fail fast, obviously. So we've used that. Also, my current pricing team works in like sprints. So this is like part of the idea of having some small tasks which bring value to the customer or to the process, like really, within a week or two, and not waiting for months to deliver like a larger, chunk of value. So this kind of elements, which are, I would say, mostly operational. But like the other thing I'm thinking is we have a methodology right now which is quite complicated, and so by developing elements of the methodology week over week, you end up at a better state compared to, for example, like a waterfall approach where you would have the target and fully make sure you develop this alternative methodology or fully improve and then launch. So I guess the broader spirit of fast releases and then iterations, we definitely done the same way software development works in tech companies.
Yeah, and just to add very briefly, the way I've seen companies use Agile, and I mean that kind of in a small a way, not like true Agile methodology way, is a lot like what you guys said is kind of figuring out the levels, right? The pricing levels. So freemium, basic to premium, and what's included in those. Now that can kind of become flexible and evolve. Now the pricing level itself, free to $9.95 to $29.95, sometimes that changes, but also what's included in each little bundle can also be based on user data, who's using what, again, you're learning, hopefully, especially with software products that you've got data analytics built in, you should be learning on a daily basis what's being used, what's not, what's being beneficial to customers. And so you can use and be flexible that way. Love the kind of A/B testing of especially new ideas, putting a kind of an ad out on one price to one cohort and another price to another, and just getting some ideas that way. That's how I've seen most kind of flexible or experimental types of pricing work.
If I may add here, I think that's it. Sorry, Kate.
No, please.
Oh, yeah, no, this was a great point. So I just wanted to add, I think we should maybe distinguish between a set pricing, like, an enterprise product that has 3 tiers. You cannot change this price of the tiers like every other day. So JJ's point is excellent around maybe changing the features or understanding, what customers care about, and add value, which makes customer value more your current price. I mean, you can update prices, I don't know, maybe every year, I don't know, every 6 months, but you cannot change prices every other week. But there's a different world where, let's say, you're running an airline company where the price of a seat, people think of it as something that changes daily or hourly. And so it's a very different pricing problem. And there you can iterate with your methodology. And that was my previous point, because, with hotels, for example, the price of a room can change every minute. And so you can, in theory, test so many more things there and learn fast and change your logic, because that doesn't impact the customer experience. Customer doesn't expect a set price and then comes the next day and sees a different price and questions why that changed.
My repeated takeaway on this topic is that pricing is extremely complex, and that it really depends on who the customer is, the size of the market, the time of product entry, if it's a new product, an established product. We're hearing all of this variance. And the follow-up question that came to us in chat after the question was asked, have you used the Agile approach, is have you found one approach that works better than the others to determine product pricing? I'm going to add a layer to that. And I'm going to add that works across these variances. Is there an approach you can take, regardless of sort of stage of product or style of product, that's more likely to help you achieve a successful product pricing strategy? And I'll open that up.
So I'll just add, I mean, it's not a methodology or a process, you know, you do A, then B, then C. It's not that easy. I wish it were. But it's the central success factor or element to pricing, no matter what, is can we pinpoint the value perception of the customer, right? It really all comes down to that. Now, as we've talked about, things can get really complicated, and there's a huge difference in an airline ticket and a soft drink. But it all comes down to how much I value that. And that's not easy in itself to get to, right? I mean, I value it different than Babis and than Shelley. And so how are we going to pinpoint that as closely as possible? And that takes true customer validation. So, I mean, literally going and asking the questions about, you know, how do you value this? How would you use this? What would you pay for this? And those sorts of questions, not necessarily what would you pay? Because they'll always say the lowest, but like, what would you do if I took this away from you? And you just learn how to ask certain questions to validate that value. That's the central element of all things pricing, no matter what industry or type of product you work on.
Thank you so much. I see several nodding heads. Is there anything anybody wants to add to that, or is that just a mic drop moment?
Oh, I've never had one of those. Oh, don't say anything, because now it's got to be a mic drop moment for me.
I think that was a wonderful answer, and thank you very much. I want to ask the next question because I think it's a very timely question, and it's with supply chain strained and demand growing quickly after the pandemic. What are your thoughts on the rising prices across industries today, particularly in food and retail? And can you comment on inflation and how that will affect customer spending? This is a big one, I think, really important question. Any thoughts on this?
I think consumers are really having to, I think we as a society are having to think about, and it's reflected in pricing, what's most important to us. And maybe where we spend our time, who we spend it with, where we live, what we buy. I can't comment on inflation so much, but I do think that consumers understand that it's happening, and they're starting to be a little proactive in terms of what they buy and how they buy. And I think it's changing. I think it's really impacting our products and our businesses and how we run them. It's more work to have to keep reevaluating your strategies when the economy is changing so quickly.
Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts on that. It's in terms of supply chain strain. I mean, there's no question across so many different industries, and I don't know that consumers get it, but they know, or get the details, but they know what's going on. To Shelley's point, from a company perspective, you have to make the decision on, and again, it goes back to who you are in your business model. Is it transactional? So in other words, you know, if you know your widget costs 25, 30, 40% more to make now, do you have to raise that price because that's your long-term business model? Or are you going to eat some of the profit for now because you have longer term relationships, and you know once things normalize in a year-ish, we hope, you know, those long-term relationships will the credibility, the trust, the relationship you build by not increasing your price too much now will pay off in the long run. So that's an organization by organization standpoint. In terms of, again, not so much on inflation, I'm no expert there, but I am hopeful because wages are increasing. I do think this whole 18-month and experience around the world, especially in the States, economically, I can speak to. We're finally starting to see a little bit of wage increases. Now that may also increase pricing to some extent, but data doesn't actually bear that out so much right now. And so I think things will normalize, both supply chain wise, wage wise, which will kind of bring up a lot of other people within the society. And I think that's a good thing. I think in the long run, that's going to be a good thing for companies to have more consumers who can potentially be, prospects for their products.
Wonderful. Babis, I'm going to turn the final question over to you. I want to make sure to get everybody's questions from chat. So this one's to you. From your experience, how can you redirect customer attention if they're fixated on price?
Yeah, I think we spoke a little bit about that. I think it all goes back to value. So, I mean, obviously, there is this price an important factor, but like at the end of the day, if you are the product that gives the most value, and because the customer, would perceive would put some value to your product, and so they subtract the price they pay, and that's the value that remains to them. And so ideally, you want to maximize your value, so no matter what they pay, they retain most of the value from this transaction. So ideally, you want to maximize this value, and part of it is the actual features you add. Part of it is the perception, which could mean better marketing, education, like proving that there is value. Like in many businesses, that might be prove that there is a cost saving. In other businesses, might be just the branding, because there's the utility of wearing a t-shirt, but if it's branded, you might feel better for some reason. And so like spending more on marketing allows you to add a premium, or being environmentally friendly company, like makes people feel better and like are willing to pay more. So there are a lot of aspects in the value discussion, but I think that's the core. It's like, how do you prove that like no matter what the price is, there's more value for the customer to spare?
Thank you so much. I'll give each of you just a brief moment for any final thoughts on the topic of pricing, starting with you, Shelley. Any final thoughts you'd like to conclude with?
Just that I think pricing is so important in the product profession, and I think just as I've spent a lot of time as a product manager, but I think it's also important for people who are designing and building products to understand how we price or how we're thinking about that. It used to just be, sales would tell us, this is what it will cost, go build it. And now I think we're in a place where product professionals are able to make some decisions and influence pricing. But I think it's important for us to sort of carry that through to our product teams so that they understand the value of what they're building, and how we're thinking about that, taking it to market, because they're the ones doing that heavy lifting, and they often don't seem to get to see that work. So I think that's really important.
Thank you, Shelley. JJ.
Yeah, I mean, really, if there's one piece of advice to learn how to price or get it right more often than not, is just dig really deep into that customer experience, that customer journey, the problem that you're solving in the first place. And it goes to that last question in chat is, how do you get people away from pricing? You got to focus them on the value. That's not easy. But if you really keenly understand every step of the journey, every step of the experience, you can find those hassles that maybe you knock down that other competitors don't. You never really know exactly what little thing in the product or experience is gonna kind of, ring that bell of value for the customer. So the more keenly you understand that entire process and entire experience, the more likely you are to succeed in getting the right price.
Thank you so much. Babis.
A couple of thoughts. I think one is was probably the theme for today in terms of like how this pricing decision has to align with the overall strategy and not like exist in a standalone manner. I would say that many companies maybe are not putting as much thought. So potentially reconsider that. There's a clear ROI there. So understanding the pricing as a lever, I think would be very interesting and has tangible benefits to the bottom line. I think the other part, based on what we discussed, is that there is there are tough pricing decisions. So you won't make it right immediately, but like this whole idea of thinking about pricing, iterating, like getting customer feedback and moving on, will eventually build this muscle and bring long-term benefits to the business.
Thank you so much. I want to thank each and every one of you again for volunteering to share your expertise, and I'll hand it back to Colin for our conclusion for today's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And thank you to all of our panelists today, Babis, JJ, Shelley, for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. This was such an insightful conversation. I think based on the engagement and the questions we had, this was an incredibly valuable session for everyone that tuned in. I will be dropping the feedback survey in the chat really quick. So if you can take a moment just to fill it out, it'll take like 1 or 2 minutes. It will help us improve our future sessions. And our next Business Bites will be in September. So be on the lookout for the registration link in our follow-up email, along with the replay link for this session. And with that, I think we can kind of finish off here. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all next month.